One of the heads of state that I met with on this visit told me the story about the two fellows in the Soviet Union that were walking down the street, and the one of them says, "Have we really achieved full communism? Is this it? Is this now full communism?" And the other one said, "Oh, hell no, things are going to get a lot worse."
It would be naive to suggest that ordinary people telling jokes could alone bring down a political system.
Thank you all.
But in the 80s, the leaders of East and West began to laugh at communism. Ronald Reagan spent so much money on the arms race that the Russians, who had less money, couldn't afford to keep up. Then he spent even more money on a Star Wars missile, which could shoot down all the Soviet missiles. This made the communists realize they were losing the Cold War. And Ronald Reagan also deployed another weapon against communism, one which has been overlooked by many historians.
He was especially interested in Soviet humor. Having used humor so effectively in American politics, he thought it was important to know what kind of jokes Soviets were telling. The White House asked the State Department to collect Soviet jokes for the president, and that request worked its way down through the bureaucracy to people at my level.
I collect stories now that I can find out and actually prove are told in the Soviet Union by Soviet citizens about their system. And it reveals they've got a great sense of humor. And also they're a little bit cynical about the way things are over there.
Certainly, President Reagan was attuned to Soviet humor as he focused more and more on what he called the evil empire that was the USSR, and classically used a Soviet joke when President Gorbachev first visited the American capital.
And this little story is one that I had the privilege of telling to General Secretary Gorbachev, and he laughed. The story had to do with an American and a Russian who were arguing about their freedoms in the government. The American said, "Look, I can walk in the Oval Office, I can pound the president's desk, and I can say, 'Mr. President, I don't like the way you're running our country.'" And the Russian said, "I can do that." The American said, "You can?" He says, "Yes. I can go in the Kremlin, I can walk into the General Secretary's office, I can pound my fist on his desk, and I can say, 'Mr. General Secretary, I don't like the way President Reagan's running his country.'"
I think that President Reagan's understanding of the Soviet Union was conditioned in important ways by his attention to what Soviet people were telling each other, and especially the jokes they were telling. I think it encouraged President Reagan in his profound belief that the Soviet people were as appalled by their government, appalled by its stupidities, its limitations, its arrogance, and therefore they were interested in being free. They would welcome a change in the political system.
And this last one had to do with a young man buying an automobile. It's not an exaggeration. It takes 10 years to get delivery in the Soviet Union. But you have to pay for the automobile right at the first, not when you get it. So this young fellow was going from agency to agency and getting permits here and permits there and stamps he was collecting, and finally at the final place and the final stamp was put on, and then he laid out the cash, and the man said, "Come back in 10 years and get your car." The young fellow started to turn away, and he turned back and he says, "Morning or afternoon?" And the fellow behind the counter said, "What difference does it make?" "Well," he said, "the plumber's coming in the morning."
In 1984, a new era began when the Politburo appointed a young leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, otherwise known as Gorby. Gorby introduced perestroika, which meant economic reform, and glasnost, which meant free speech, which were the two main things that all the communist jokes had been going on about.
So the joke is that there is a line queuing to buy vodka in Moscow. And it's 2-3 kilometers long. And men are really blaming Gorbachev. One of them said, "I'll go to the Kremlin and I'll kill Gorbachev." And the other said, "Okay, you go." And he went. An hour later, he came back. The line went on a little bit, but it's still far from the goal. So they asked him, "Did you kill Gorbachev?" He said, "No, there's a longer line there."